Hi, I'm Jason Frazier, and this is Leverage the Brains, the workshop podcast where I help you get the most out of yourself and your team by getting stuff out of your heads, organizing it in meaningful ways, and focusing on the parts that matter right now. My wife / co-founder / co-author and I released a book in 2023 where we lay out 4 leadership motions that will help you reduce stress and make extraordinary progress wherever you lead. This video is going to give you a quick introduction to Lean Startup. It's meant to set you up for doing the Assumptions and Experiments workshop, where you'll identify the riskiest assumptions behind your product or project and construct experiments to help you learn whether or not those assumptions are true. Even if you're not ready to do the Assumptions and Experiments workshop right now, this talk will give you a basic understanding of Lean Startup and how it can be applied. So let's dive right in. This is how most organizations approach a project. They do a bunch of analysis to figure out what they think customers will buy or what might suit a particular need. Then they write up a big plan, a product specification. They bring the plan to their stakeholders and ask for feedback. Maybe they do some revisions based on that feedback. Then they take a guess at how much they think it'll cost to execute, and they get approval on that budget. And then they execute according to the detailed plan that they've crafted. Nothing ever goes wrong at this stage because the plans are so thorough. And when they're done, if they measure at all, it's usually just to see whether they were on time, on budget, and on spec. Note that none of these measurements are about the value delivered, and it's possible that there was none. Lean Startup provides an alternative to this approach. It'll help you discover the flaws in your strategy before they can have a negative impact on the outcome. Use this approach when there are a lot of unknowns and the cost of failure is very high. Lean Startup isn't just for startup companies. It's a broadly applicable alternative to traditional project management and strategy processes. And lean doesn't mean cheap. Think of it more like efficiency, like lean muscle tissue. So to illustrate this process, my co-author Janice and I have been using the parable of the wedding cake for almost 15 years now. These are my friends, Pat and Chris, and they're getting married in just a couple months, and they've been working hard on all the big plans. An important part of this, of course, is the cake. So one day they head to the local baker and they say, "We need a wedding cake." And the baker says, "Ooh, you're in luck. I do a great wedding cake," and presents them with this cake. "It's 3 tiers, said the baker excitedly. But the only tears that Chris and Pat are imagining are the tears of their family when they see this cake. They try a slice and eye each other nervously. This is not what they had in mind. Chris says, I think we need to update the look a bit. And then, whispering to Pat so as not to offend the baker, "The decoration on this one reminds me of my grandma's couch." Pat stifles a giggle and says, "I think maybe we should explore some other flavors too. This German chocolate with the coconut thing, it's not my favorite." So the baker, somewhat taken aback, says, "Okay, I hear that. I'll make some edits. Why don't you come back next week and we'll try again." So the next week, Pat and Chris come back to find that the baker has made cupcakes. The cupcakes are a hazelnut flavor instead of the German chocolate, and the decoration is smaller in proportion but more busy, and it still incorporates the pink flowers. Pat and Chris each try a cupcake. They both love the hazelnut cake, but Chris is still not into the decoration. Pat says, "With the flowers so small like this, it almost looks like a sharp sort of texture. What if we lean harder into that and had some sort of texture instead of the flowers?" The baker agrees to give it another try. The next week, they come back and the baker has made a hazelnut layer cake, doubling down on the cake flavor that they liked so much and using the frosting to make a texture. No flowers this time. This is a massive improvement for Chris and Pat. Seeing the cake as a layer cake helps them to see what it would be like served up at a wedding, and seeing the texture all over helps them understand what it could look like at a larger scale. Pink, though. Chris is just really not into pink. Pat suggests that maybe they should just go with white as a nod to tradition. This leaves the baker in a bit of a bind. See, there's a fear that the texture will just wash out if the cake is all white. If it's going to be spectacular, it's going to need a lot more texture. So the next week, Chris and Pat come back, and the baker has made this. Chris and Pat are over the moon for it. The texture is novel and it's busy enough that it stands out even though it's all white. And they know that underneath the decoration is that fabulous hazelnut sponge. As a finishing flourish, the baker had even managed to find a topper that looked exactly like Chris and Pat. So what happened? With input from the customer, the baker went from this product vision to this end product. The baker's head was full of assumptions about what a wedding cake should be, and those assumptions were literally baked into the first version of the product. Luckily for us, the baker was a good listener and was able to learn and adapt based on customer feedback. This is the pattern for Lean Startup, and using this pattern allows us to go from something that's pretty ordinary to something extraordinary, something that doesn't really make our customers happy to something that fills them with joy. And we do it through successive iterations of getting a real product into the hands of real users and listening and acting on their feedback. Using this process, the baker was able to make something that they probably never would have dreamt of if they hadn't been pushed by all that feedback. So, have a vision, start small, test, try again, test, try again, each time leveraging the bits that were really good and changing the bits that didn't work. So what is Lean Startup? Lean Startup is an approach for building companies that are creating new products and services in situations of extreme uncertainty. Now, what do I mean by extreme uncertainty? Let's say you're a clothing manufacturer and you decide you're going to start making socks for humans. You can assume that you should sell them in pairs. And while not universally true, most humans have 2 feet, and selling socks in pairs will give you access to a majority of the market. But let's say we've just had our first contact with aliens, just radio contact, right? We haven't seen them. But you, being entrepreneurial, want to be the first in the market for selling socks to aliens. Now, we don't even know if they have feet, much less how many feet they have or the shape of them. So it's a pretty high-risk market, and this is a place that's right for a Lean Startup approach. There's so much we need to learn before we can deliver a top-of-the-line product in this category, even if we're the only player in the category so far. So the Lean Startup approach advocates creating small products, like the cupcake, that test the creator's assumptions and using customer feedback to evolve the product, thereby reducing waste. What do we mean by waste here? Well, if we build a product that no one wants, we've wasted our time, we've wasted our money or our investors' money, and we've wasted the resources that we applied to the project. We might end up landfilling a whole bunch of unwanted socks. So Eric Ries's 2011 book, The Lean Startup, was the start of all of this, though it did incorporate things like Steve Blank's customer development and user-centered design and agile software development. Eric's book called on people to list their assumptions, understand their customers, get real product out into the world, and adjust direction based on evidence. And I'll add a 0 point here, and that is that you have to recognize that you have assumptions in the first place. You can only list them if you can see them. So many people walk into a project thinking that everyone sees the world the same way they do, that everyone sees the problem the same way, etc. So they apply their own perspective to a project, never even seeing that their perspective might be off. They think of things as facts rather than leaps of faith, and that's a big risk. So build, measure, learn is the mantra of Lean Startup. You build product that you put out into the world, you measure the impact that it's having, you learn from the data that you get back, and that gives you ideas about what to change or what to build next. This is very similar to a cycle that's been around in the design world for a long time. Think, make, check. Now, one of the best aspects of Lean Startup is that it really pushes teams to deliver. People tend to get stuck in the places they're the most comfortable in. Engineers like to build, right? Let's write code and then let's write some more. So they build without measuring or learning. And designers get stuck on the think part of the think, make, check cycle. They want to envision how the whole thing could or should work before they deliver anything. And they think without making anything. In both of these cases, you're accumulating a lot of risk. So let's see what that looks like. Doing work without proof that your assumptions are good builds up a mountain of risk and potential waste. If you fall off the top, it can be a very long way down. Instead, Lean Startup proposes lots of little wiggles. Using this pattern allows you to pay down that risk as you're building value over time. Note that this process allows you to take a little more risk if you want to. That angle is a little steeper because you know you're going to pay it down right away. If you fall during one of these cycles, it's not really so far. Each one of these little triangles, these saw teeth, represents a build, measure, learn loop. And taking the learning and using it to make your decisions about what to build next is what helps you de-risk your product. We call this the product stack. You can use this as a guide through your learning loops. You need to start at the top of the stack, your users. Through engagement with your users, you can understand their needs, and their needs suggest uses they might have for your product, and the uses suggest features that you can build. So you deliver those features and learn from the reactions of your users, which puts you right back up at the top of the stack. You can traverse this stack as much as you need to get to a place where you're creating real value for your customers and your business. Finally, Lean isn't just about mitigating risk, it's also about speed to value so that effort doesn't get wasted. So the last time we saw this graph, we were talking about accumulating risk over time, and that's a real thing, but we're also storing up value over time if we're not delivering it. And the longer we go without delivering, the less benefit people will receive from the value we're creating. So this same illustration that we use to show how you can pay down risk through validation also shows how you can deliver incremental value. To do this, you break your project down into independently deliverable chunks that can provide value faster, and then you add on successive layers of functionality to make it better. This way, your company and your customers both get to enjoy the value you're creating sooner. It's sort of like if you put $1 in the bank 100 years ago and compounded interest over that whole time, you'd end up with a lot more money today than if you put that same dollar in the bank yesterday. So that's it for the Intro to Lean Startup. Before you go, though, take a minute to think about these questions. Pause the video if you need to. First, what surprised you about this talk? Second, what kinds of assumptions are you building into your product development process or project management? Third, how can your team start to implement the build, measure, learn wiggle? What's your cupcake? Okay, awesome. So, hey, I hope you've enjoyed today's workshop. Check out the book, please. Connect with me on LinkedIn. If you've got questions, please feel free to hit me up either on LinkedIn or in the comments. I'm always happy to answer questions. Don't forget to like and follow. And thanks a lot. I'll see you in the next video.